All right, welcome back. Gosh, I am truly excited for what Nikita has to share this morning or this afternoon, wherever you might be. It is the case where Nikita Mikhailov, Chief Neuroscience Officer of PsyPub, has actually. I'm not going to steal your thunder, but what is PsyPub all about?
Oh, thank you for that, Al. Basically, PsyPub's mission is to share the goodness of psychology with the world. Because building on what you previously said, there's so much good that we can offer, especially in turbulent times like now.
Yeah, I mean, that's the reason I'm excited. I know you're going to have an interactive, program with us today. So I'm going to get out of your way, let you, do your thing, and then we'll chat towards the end. That sound good?
Sounds like a plan to me.
All right, enjoy.
4 people, to me, that's a representative sample, so we'll crack on. So a little bit about me. Around 5,000 one-to-one sessions. So usually it's either coaching or one-to-ones, debriefs, however you name it. Probably qualified around 100 people in psychometrics and how to use them. Qualified in around a dozen tools. Worked for 3 different publishers. Involved with a few. I remembered what this too is about. So this too is about that when I was about to be engaged, I profiled my spouse to be with 2 psychometrics before proposing, because I believe living it to 1 assessment is purely irresponsible. And I still have 1 child. She's a pilot study. Data is being gathered. So you can pretty much see obsessed with personality. Now, if you think profiling your spouse to be with 2 separate personality assessments, that's being obsessive. Here's another one. So then I went to the pub with my mentor, and us psychometricians are an alcoholics club with a psychometric problem, really. That's sometimes the impression that I get. So I went for a drink with my buddy, Wendy, and she was also my mentor. And I go, Wendy, I met the one. She was like, what's her name? And I go, Olga. She was like, cool, show me Olga. What do? I take out her Neo portrait and hand it to Wendy, the profile page. She looks at it and she goes, yes. Mate, you totally lost it. I meant a picture. So I'm pretty obsessed with the subject of psychometrics. So the way I use them in teams, coaching, couples work now, office design, facilitation. And what really excites me is how we can facilitate collective intelligence through a better understanding of individual differences. Because the more I work in this field, the more I realize that there is no such thing as objective perception of reality. All of us perceive it on a subjective level, because our reality is constructed within our craniums based from the senses and information we get from them on a schema of how the world should look like. So nobody sees the world the same way. And I think this is one of the key reasons why our species is so successful. Well, I use the term successful loosely. Time will tell how successful we are as a species. But because we all perceive the world slightly differently. So there's like 7.5 billion versions of this world walking about. So the fact that we communicate and can work collaboratively is so impressive. So to me, it's how we can facilitate the collective intelligence of all these wonderful individuals that are either in a team or in a company or in a society to solve our biggest problems. And I think one of the key steps for that is to share the goodness of psychology. So that's about enough narcissism from me. So we're using a little platform called Mentimeter because I will be curious to hear from you. So if you can go to menti.com, either on your phone or laptop or desktop, Messenger, Pigeons, and Telegraph does not work, but everything else pretty much does. And type in the code 2475374. So 2475374. And I'm just really curious to hear from you. If you could not use the word personality, what words would you use? So if anybody would like to volunteer. So if you can go to menti.com and just type in the code. Excellent, we have an answer. So way of being, that's quite Zen as well. So way of being is a very good description. We also get quite often behaviors, traits, characters. Exactly, we're getting there. There's a lot of ways we can describe personality. And talking about this unique perspectives on the world, we also have unique perspective on what personality means. So what I find fascinating working in the world of psychometrics, we all have a different perspective of what's meant by personality. So when I'm working with a client and they ask me, we'd like to measure our personalities and strong personalities, etc. My question is, well, what does personality mean to you? Because it's one of these fantastic terms, which is perceived being so objective, but in reality, when you get under the bonnet, is actually quite a subjective term. And the way that I kind of get around that is that I feel there's kind of, broadly speaking, there's 3 levels to personality. There's preference, what you like, your values, natural disposition, what you're interested in. So preference. Then there's behavior, what you do. And there's also maladaptive response. So what you do too much, or behavior under stress. So just roughly speaking, what you like, what you do, and what you do too much. And I feel that it's very important when we look at psychometric instruments, we actually look what the items are asking. So actually, are these items combobulated together? And they ask items like, I like to tell people how I feel, and I often tell people how I feel, and they box it into one score, or do they actually separate between the levels? And I find that this dynamic between trait and behavior, that's what's most interesting. Because whenever I work with a client, one of the questions that I ask them is, what aspects of your personality do you consciously manage at work? And why do you think it's necessary to do so? Because observing this dynamic is quite interesting to see, what sort of a job to person fit are we talking about? And exploring this is really nice. And out of the hundreds of thousands sessions in which I ask this question, nobody has ever said nothing. Everybody's managing something, and it's not a bad thing. I believe you can still be authentic and manage your personality. I think because it's you who's managing it. But of course, there are other fun things like EQ, self-management 360s. So right now, the model that I tend to use is the Big Five. Some of you might have heard of it. So as far as I'm concerned, 5 is a magic number. Those people who think 3 is a magic number, they have a point, but I think 5 is the magic number. However, little caveat for now. Maybe there's 6. Maybe humility, it will be integrated into the Big Five, so it'll become a Big 6. Maybe 10 years' time, it'd be the Big 10. Who knows? That's the beauty of personality psychology. It's a science, well, as best as we can make it a science, because the theories are evolving. So when we talked about the Big Five, we're talking about neuroticism. So it's all about perception of threat and risk and the propensity for negative emotional affect. And I think neuroticism has a really bad rap. That's why I call myself Chief Neuroticism Officer. Not only that I'm neurotic, as you might tell, but the key thing is there's so much of an accent on happiness and all of this. But negative emotions have so much to tell us. Like, if you have somebody really low on neuroticism, hypothetically, it's like, good. But I find that when I'm working with people who are really low on neuroticism, they find it difficult to empathize people on high neuroticism. Like, what are you empathizing to if you don't know how the darkness feels like? I love the song Hello Darkness, My Old Friend. It's like one of the best soundtracks to neuroticism. And also looking at risk, when there's a big faux pas and like there's a big mistake happens and then it goes public, and I go, was there enough neuroticism on that board? Maybe they shouldn't have released that ad that was hugely culturally insensitive. Maybe if there was somebody who was higher on neuroticism was like, wait a minute, what if this goes wrong? And they will listen to, maybe it wouldn't happen. Maybe. I would also love to see correlations and analysis of different countries' leadership teams and their levels of neuroticism and how they reacted with COVID. Maybe high levels of neuroticism and closing the borders, there's a correlation there. So also interesting way. Then you have extroversion, which is positive emotional affect and the need for stimuli, God bless it. But I also feel something gets lost. So one of the things that I appreciate about type approach to personality. Now, I know type and trait is a whole argument, and I've spilled so much beer in pubs arguing like trait-based psychometrics or type-based psychometrics. It's both. It took me 10 years to realize it. It's trait to type, really extreme preferences like type, but people in the middle, trait. But what's really key here is that the issue with a lot of Big Five tools they measure extroversion. And if you score low on extroversion, they go, ha, you're an introvert. So they treat introversion as absence of extroversion. And what I appreciate about the type approach, it measures two separately. So I'm very much for a bimodal measurement of the big five. So you measure extroversion and introversion separately. Gives you more scope. And what I find with people high on introversion, they're still extroverted. They're just very selective about what they're extroverted about. So let's say that an introvert is an extrovert with good taste. So they're quite selective of what they're extroverted about. And this negative positive emotional perspective is quite interesting, because we look for managers. Let's say we want people high on extroversion, positive, and low on neuroticism. But I was once debriefing somebody who scored 5th percentile on neuroticism, 95th percentile on extroversion. And I said, how do you react to your more emotionally dynamic colleagues? And he goes, Nikita, it's so simple. I don't know why you ask. So when they come to me with their emotions, I tell them two things. I tell them nobody died and they should grow up. I go, interesting approach. And I said, what do you do if this doesn't work? He goes, I just send them to HR. Empathetic leadership there, isn't it? So to me, what's really important is that, especially with neuroticism and extroversion, we value the good and the overdone, but each trait has something to offer. Then we have openness, which is all about curiosity and exploration. And now, so much about innovation in the workplace. And that's brilliant. But I always say innovation is one side of the coin. On the other is implementation. And the two need to connect. So if we put only on curiosity and openness, and when I deal with clients really high on openness, we're talking about 90th percentile, 95th percentile and above. I always say, you are logical, but it's your own logic. What's logical to you might not be logical to most people. And if two people high on openness create a presentation, and they having a wild time creating these ideas, when they present it to more pragmatic colleagues go, are these people on a different planet? This is not what's on the agenda. So it's very important to balance it up and respect both sides. And then we have agreeableness, so attitude towards the people and importance placed on relationships outside of the in-group. So this is something that kind of came across, because people who are low on agreeableness, who score, let's say, low on empathy as far as percentiles, it doesn't mean they're not empathetic. So what I'm finding, and this is purely anecdotal, is that they're very selective of who they empathize with. So they have a close in-group, 5 to 10 people, and to them, they really care about them. But people outside of this in-group, not particularly. And what's one of the key misconceptions between high agreeableness and low agreeableness, sometimes high agreeableness might complain of what they're not getting when they're not in an ideal situation. But low agreeableness just wants to know what they want. So what I always say to high agreeableness, to kind of help to meet in the middle, is behind every complaint lies a wish. So tell people what you want instead. And then you have conscientiousness, which is strengths of drive and purpose. And there's a lot of overlay with grit. And people go, conscientiousness is great. It is, when situations are predictable. When situations are unpredictable, conscientiousness not so great. Because conscientiousness, people who are high on conscientiousness tend to want things to remain the same. Because if you have predictability, you have performance. And all these pesky things that might come up are get in the way. So in my anecdotal experience, sometimes you can be too conscientious, especially if circumstances change. And when you deal with people low on conscientiousness, I never say you're not conscientious. So you are conscientious, but you have like half an hour willpower a day. So be really conscious how you use it. So the key thing here is that all of the traits can be strengths, even neuroticism, and all of the traits can be overdone, such as conscientiousness. And that very much depends on the circumstances. So to me, whenever I use personality model, I need to have this. I need to have a model which stresses the strengths of all the traits and that all of them can be overdone. So 5 is the magic number. And here are the things which fall outside of the portrait or profile. Respect to your psychological opposite. Like, this is the key. This is not captured in a profile. Because do you respect somebody who is opposite to you? And this makes all the difference. I dealt with really strong personalities, like really one-sided, like low agreeableness, high extroversion. But when I asked them to draw the person you were closest to, it was like their mirror opposite. And sometimes when I asked them to draw somebody like them, it was very similar to them. So I was exploring the problems that might come up with this. So to me, it's really important, do you respect your psychological opposite? Just like that manager I previously mentioned, high extroversion, low neuroticism, didn't necessarily respect neuroticism that much. Now, diversity of personality. I'm a big fan of diversity and I'm all for it. But sometimes what I feel is missing is diversity of personality. And we need to stress this. Based on respect, based on this incomposition of personality, we need to select all sorts of different personalities. And I know it's really tempting when you have high correlations, which is like 0.3, 0.4, 0.5 on a really good day, between a particular trait and a job performance. Yes, we can incorporate it into a selection process, but we need to be kind of conscious. Okay, what is the long-term implications if I just select people high in conscientiousness? Because I believe in a talent ecosystem. You need all sorts of different personalities working together for a really high-performing team. Though when I have a really diverse personality team, I would say I have good news and bad news. Good news, you have diversity of personality, so you see the world differently. So if we present you with a problem, you'll come up with all of the solutions, with a lot of different ones. But bad news, you have diversity of personality. You will get on each other's nerves without any intention of doing so at some point. And also confirmation bias. Because if you don't have the respect of different personalities, confirmation bias sits in and it can be a little bit tricky. And the way it can look like, let's say if you have somebody who's really low on agreeableness, and he's been a little bit rude to somebody high on agreeableness. Deep down, he knows it, or she knows it. But instead of talking with this person, go, look, what happened? What do they do? Well, they get somebody also low on agreeableness and they go for a drink. And I work a bit in Canary Wharf, and there's a nice little pub called Old Bar One under the Reuters sign. And I hear the same conversation, not that I listen in, playing out. Tables next to me. And it goes something like this. I wasn't too harsh, was I? No, they need to learn. Or if they think they have it tough, they have no idea how we had it in our 20s. So that's confirmation bias. So, and especially if you have siloing and valuing one side of personality and not valuing the others, this will happen. And this will erode the team functioning. So being aware of confirmation bias, being aware of the importance of diversity and respecting different personalities and psychological opposites, I believe like some of the things which don't get captured. And I can totally get this because let's say if we take a profile, neuroticism 95th percentile, extroversion 90th percentile, openness 99th, agreeableness 15th, conscientiousness 5th percentile. And that's my profile, roughly speaking. And the issue with such a profile potentially, is volatility, being conscious of how you're perceived. And when we see percentiles, it took me years to get over this. We see it as an item of measurement, same as we're used to seeing centimeters or weights. So we see it as, very static, it's a measure. But so sometimes psychometrics give you the impression it's like this. We put the human soul on a pair of scales and then we get the measurement. Actually, it doesn't work that way. So to me, I like to think of psychometric numbers like percentiles as squishy numbers. They're squishy by context. They're squishy by behavior or environment. And there's some really interesting research like situational strength coming up, personality strength. So the interaction about how strong is your preference to how strong you feel the environment is oppressing your personality. And to me, what's really exciting is that we're looking at this dynamically. And I think this is what data analytics can give us. We can look at personality in a little bit more of a dynamic way and see how personality fluctuates. And I think everybody has its own rhythm. So it's almost like the individual's personality dynamics is like a meta factor of personality. And I mean, I would love to give somebody a big five with their morning coffee for a year and see how it combines, but I'm not sure it's going to be that ethical. Well, depends how you look at it. Maybe they really like to complete questionnaires. So just as a little experiment, just to finish up, if you go to menti.com and type in the code 2475374, I want you to hear from you what qualities you think affect the way we behave, like what circumstances, what affects our behavior, how many variables can we get? So you can go just to menti.com and just type in 2475374. That'd be greatly appreciated. Excellent, we're getting some replies. My mindset, my physical health, and others. Yeah, Absolutely. So sometimes our personality is influenced by how we feel. So neuroticism sometimes can be a great indicator of not feeling so great. Like, I'm feeling quite neurotic right now. Well, there's a pandemic. You risk losing your job, and you haven't been taking care of yourselves that much. Also, people around me. Absolutely. I love the English language because you can look for some interesting phrases, like some people bring out the worst in me, some people bring out the best. That's really interesting how we interact with others. And what's really interesting, sometimes it's the same person who brings out the worst and best, but it depends how we feel. Environment, people, money, absolutely. Some of us are stressed more by this than others. Like especially in April, as an independent consultant, when all my work was paused, yeah, my neuroticism went up. Family, loved ones too, yeah. And you affect them as well. Because quite often when you get this lovely personality profile, it's on a piece of A4, well, on a PDF now, it's so boundaried. But what you miss is all these lovely interactions, because no man or woman is an island. And how we interact with others is fascinating. Sleep, perception, all of these factors influence how we behave. So when we look at the personality profile, I advise you to look with curiosity and empathy, or personality data, and just see what might be happening for them. Why neuroticism is increasing? Why is it decreasing? And asking what's happening for them, because it doesn't matter how much data I have on a person. My first question to them after we sit down, well, or connect on Zoom now, is how would you describe yourself? Because to me, it's very important to get their perception of themselves before I marry it up with the data. And then we can explore it together. So yeah, that's about me in a nutshell. Any questions or reflections?
Nikita, that was fantastic. And I want to ask a question right off the bat, because you shared that this idea of psychometric measures not being kind of fixed like in a math problem. And as we all know, consciously or unconsciously, the way we view numbers elicits an emotional response, particularly when those numbers reflect who we are. So is there any coaching that you would give us, particularly as the analytics community, those who are creating data, finding data, using data for analytical purposes, to whether it be cautionary or an opportunity, how should we be thinking about psychometric data specifically? Not only being these softer, malleable things, but how to wrap a narrative around it that makes the insight that we generate more accepting. Any coaching on that?
Well, all right. Let me give it some thought. So from my perspective, start out with curiosity to data anomalies. So if you get one data set, which is, let's say, self-report, but the data set of how they're being seen in their performance review is very different. That in itself is really a lot of fun. Let's say if people are constantly underscoring their performance, might that indicate neuroticism? Because one of the pillars of neuroticism is a negative self-construct. Or if people rate themselves much higher than others rate them, well, maybe that's a bit of indications of narcissism. So that's something to be explored. Another key with self-report. If you were ever doubting, it's always interesting to quiz people. When was the last time they updated their self-narrative? Quite often, especially with self-report, like, I scored myself low on conscientious. So my partner, Olga, was looking through my profile. She goes, your conscientiousness went up. Like, it's not fifth percentile anymore. So how often we update ourselves is also interesting, because it is a self-narrative we're assessing. So how often you edit your self-narrative is quite important.
Wow. Yeah, I definitely want to talk to you more about this. Obviously we're at time, but number one, I want to commit to doing a podcast with you if you're up for it, because I got tons of questions, and I'm sure others will as well once they see this segment. And two, how can people learn more about you and PsyPub?
Oh, well, I'm a social media addict with a psychology problem, so just follow me on LinkedIn. And we also have like an initiative, psychology@work.blog. We have a YouTube channel. So recently I published a 5-lecture course on personality. So because I feel that a lot of people, personality is a fascinating area, but we spend so much time squabbling about it. Because to me, the metaphor of personality I use is, when blindfolded people are touching an elephant parable. You know, somebody touches the trunk, it goes, oh, this is soft. Somebody touching the foot, that's hard. So when people use like personality, EQ, values, dark side, dark triad, etc., we're all touching the same elephant, but we don't know what it is. And this is a phenomenon of individual differences. So to me, what I'm really curious about is learning from each other. So I talk with clinical psychologists, how clinicals use psychometrics, or how educational psychologists use them. And just, there's so much to learn from each other, and how data analytics use them now, because we can learn from each other. And this is what ultimately why I'm really excited about PAFOW and other initiatives, because it is about learning.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Again, I look forward to continuing the conversation. Nikita, thank you very much. And yeah, look forward to talking with you very soon.
Pleasure.
All right, be well.